As I stated in my previous video, today we will be discussing one of the 7 covenants given to Abraham, the covenant of the torch. We discussed last time that God's administration over the redemption of fallen man was carried out through his covenants. Arguably, the covenant of the torch is the most significant because it can be considered a condensed summary of the entire history through which God saves mankind. The covenant of the torch is a covenant in which God explains how he will build his kingdom, and the elements of God's kingdom are clearly established through this covenant. Up until this point, God has been working with individuals. Through the covenant of the torch, God reveals his plan for advancing his quest to save mankind to a national level. The dictionary definition of a nation is a large aggregate of people united by a common descent, history, culture, or language inhabiting a particular country or territory. So the requirements for a nation are both people and territory or land. Through the covenant of the torch, God reveals his plan to provide Abraham's descendants with both. We are quickly approaching one of my favorite points in biblical history because we're getting very close to the first point at which God's historical record, the Bible, and man's current view of historical events line up. Now, we've already discussed that there is archaeological evidence proving that Eber existed and that he was the ruler of a nation-state of Ebla, and back in 2007, teams of archaeologists began to excavate what appeared to be Noah's Ark outside the Valley of Eight near Mount Ararat in Turkey. I'll put a link in the video description of the article in the National Geographic when they covered that story. But though we have archaeological evidence that certain events may have transpired similar to the ones in the Bible, we are now approaching a point when God's administration begins to encounter world powers at the time. All historians know the role that nations such as Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome played in history, and we are coming up on biblical events where God interacts with these nations. Before we get there, however, we need to discuss God's plan, which he conveniently provided to Abraham in Genesis 15 through one of the most pivotal covenants in biblical history, the covenant of the torch. Let's begin reading Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not fear. Abram, I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great." Abraham said, "O Lord, what will you give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer from Damascus?" And Abram said, "Since you have given no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir." Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir." And he took him outside and said, "Now look at the heavens, and count the stars, if you are able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it." He said, "O Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it?" So he said to him, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, and a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Then he brought all these to him, and cut them in two, and laid each half opposite each other, but he did not cut the birds. So the scene is set. Abraham has done as we discussed in our last study. He is prepared for a covenant to be established between himself and God by cutting offerings in half. Remember, we discussed in our past video that this was an ancient Near Eastern practice where both parties would walk between the pieces of these sacrifices, signifying what would happen to them if they were to break the agreement. Let's keep reading. "The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. God said, Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. It came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates." God promises to Abraham the elements for a nation, descendants, and land. God, who once worked through one individual and his family, is now expanding his plan to the scale of a nation and eventually to the entire world. Through this covenant, God promises that the land of Canaan would be granted to Abraham's descendants. A detailed description of the covenant of the torch is as follows. Abraham's descendants would become strangers in a foreign land where they would be oppressed for 400 years, but they would eventually come out with great possessions. Abraham would be buried at a good old age and return to his fathers in peace. Abraham's descendants would return to the land of Canaan in the 4th generation. And finally, God outlined the boundaries for Canaan. After disclosing the contents of the covenant with Abraham, God confirmed it with a smoking oven and a flaming torch. Let's read Genesis 15:17 again. And it came to pass, when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. After having watched for the birds of prey and driven them away when they came down to eat on the carcasses, Abraham waited tirelessly for God's presence until the sun went down. The first thing that he saw that finally appeared over the dedicated sacrifices was a smoking oven. The Hebrew phrase for a smoking oven is tanur asan and refers to a hot furnace used to melt and refine metal. This is a foreshadow of the suffering that Abraham's descendants would face in the future. There are 3 places, in fact, in the Bible that the oppression of Abraham's descendants in Egypt is likened to an iron furnace. One might wonder, why would God do this to a people he planned to use? But therein lies God's administration. God wanted to cause Israel, Abraham's descendants, faith to mature through trial and affliction. Let's read James 1 verses 2 through 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. God wanted to raise Israel into a great nation that trusted only in Him and wanted to establish them as true possessors of the land of Canaan. To do that, He had to teach them to rely only on Him. And through their deliverance from Egypt, He would display for them both His love for them and His power to save them. The second thing to appear to Abraham was a flaming torch, which, after appearing to him, passed between the pieces that Abraham had cut. In the Bible, fire is often used to signify God's presence and His manifestation to man. Events such as the burning bush from which God spoke to Moses and the pillar of fire that guided the Israelites after the Exodus are just 2 examples. The torch that appeared and passed between the pieces then was a symbol to Abraham that God would assume responsibility for the covenant. Note that the Bible does not record that Abraham passed between the pieces. Remember, we discussed last time that God's covenants are unilateral. And just as God unilaterally gave His covenant to Noah and saved him from the judgment, so now He unilaterally gave Abraham His covenant, promising to make him into a nation. Abraham truly is an important figure in redemptive history. Through this covenant, God promises to establish His kingdom on earth in a physical place called Canaan. The covenant was ratified with Abraham when he was around 84 years old in 2082 BC. And through historical events, God would take Abraham's descendants to Egypt in 1876 BC and then bring them out of Egypt in 1446 BC. And 56 years later, this covenant would be fulfilled in 1390 BC. It would eventually take 692 years, but God fulfilled this promise. Galatians 3:29 states, "And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to promise." Through faith in Jesus, we are enrolled in Abraham's lineage. The Bible also refers to us as adopted sons into Abraham's line. As the Israelites were freed from sin in Egypt, so we are freed from the burden of sin through Christ's death on the cross. And now that we have been freed, we are on a journey to reach God's true kingdom. Deacon Stephen even compared the current period to the nation of Israel during their journey to Canaan, when he used the Greek word for congregation to describe Israel after they had left Egypt. Please believe that just as God fulfilled the covenant He gave to Abraham to give possession of His kingdom to Abraham's descendants, He will bring us into His kingdom in the end. Thank you for watching this study. If you enjoyed it, please give the video a like. It really helps to spread these videos. And subscribe so you can keep up to date with my latest videos when they're released. And God bless.